I felt so saddened when I actually witnessed this murder happen right before my eyes. And I could only think about the kids watching and what they must have been thinking. The fact that it has been happening over and over and over again, I believe that it was just the straw that broke the backs of so many people before that young man. To see the young people take to the streets, I felt like it was about time. It made me think about the protesters from 1916. It made me think about the day that I walked up those stairs when I integrated Frantz School.
As a 6-year-old girl integrating William Frantz Elementary, do you remember much from that day, Ruby?
I definitely remember that day. You know, even though I had already gone to an all-Black school for kindergarten, I knew what school was like. At least I thought I knew what to expect. But, you know, now I was going to switch schools and go to my neighborhood school, which happened to be a white school. But my parents never explained that to me. And when I arrived and I saw the crowd of protesters, you know, living here in New Orleans and being accustomed to Mardi Gras, that's exactly what it looked like. I thought we had stumbled into a Mardi Gras parade. What I remember the most as a child was that the crowd would come and they would bring a small baby's coffin, and they put this Black doll inside of the coffin, and they would march around the school, and I would have to pass it to get inside of the building. And I used to have nightmares about the coffin. That was my first encounter knowingly about racism. I realized at that point, it's not Mardi Gras. It all came together and it made sense then. I knew that it was about me, and I knew that it was about the color of my skin.
How did you feel, Ruby, when President Obama put that Norman Rockwell painting, The Problem We All Live With, in front of the Oval Office?
I was so proud of that moment because it was the 50th anniversary of my walk into the school. When I got the phone call to come and see it, I cannot even begin to tell you how moved I was. I remember when I went in to meet him, they were explaining how I should greet him when he came into the room. And so I did exactly what they said. I extended my hand and I said, "Mr. President, it's an honor to meet you." And he put his hands on his hips. He looked at me and he said, "I want a hug." And he just wrapped his arms around me and he whispered in my ear, "I cannot begin to tell you how honored I am to invite you into this White House." When I looked around the room as I was leaning over his shoulders, there were only about a dozen people in the room. They all started to cry. And at that moment, I understood what that meant. It wasn't he and I meeting. It was history. It was those two generations coming together. Everything that all those people fought for. I think if we look at the protests that are in the street and has spread across the country, those protesters look very different from the protesters during the civil rights movement. Yes, there were lots of white folks, Hispanics, lots of people that took part during the civil rights movement. But what we see today in the streets is very, very powerful. And I believe that that is because of what Dr. King was struggling for and so many others, both Black and white, those rights that we were experiencing and taking advantage of. That is what I am so hopeful about. They've taken on this charge, and I think the baton has been passed. You know, I always say that my point of view actually comes from the point of view of a child, because that's my legacy. And again, I say that if we're going to get past our racial differences, it's really going to come from our kids. I want to get the kids before that's been passed on to them. None of our babies come into the world knowing anything about disliking someone because of the color of their skin. Our babies, no matter who we are, they come into the world with a very special gift, and that is a clean heart. For 25 years, I've been working with kids in schools all across this country. When I looked into their eyes, I didn't see hatred or racism. I saw hope. I knew that they too were exactly like me, that they still had that innocence that they came into the world with. And I thought it was important to help them to understand that racism has no place in their minds and in their hearts. And know, really, that we're all human, and that, you know, what Dr. King stood for is that you should never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I think what we see in the streets today speaks to that. I was always hopeful, and I am hopeful today, because what I see is that this is spread across the country. And I think when we open our doors and we are able to go back out, this world is going to be a different place.